For nearly 35 years, Daniel Harper lived next door in Riverton, Ohio. Quiet, unassuming.
The kind of man you barely notice when walking past. Yet he watched, he observed, he waited. Families prayed for miracles, but he vanished into the shadows, leaving only whispers behind.
Riverton streets
Thrived on normalcy. Children raced their bikes down cracked sidewalks, their laughter echoing off brick houses. Neighbors exchanged casual greetings over white picket fences. Dogs barked in the distance, mail carriers called out friendly hellos, and the hum of ordinary life masked a darkness no one could see. Every smile, every ordinary routine, every peaceful moment gave cover. He moved through these streets like a ghost, unseen yet ever present. The victims were ordinary Americans, people who could be anyone's neighbor, co-worker, or friend.
Emily,
Finishing her evening shift at a diner, her footsteps fading into the night as she imagined returning home safely.
Ryan Mitchell,
Ambitious and bright, walking alone from late-night study sessions, never to return.
Ava Bennett,
Meticulous and cautious, disappearing along familiar streets she walked daily. Each disappearance left families in limbo. Each unanswered question weighed heavily on hearts already broken. Communities whispered in fear, sharing rumors over backyard fences and at grocery stores. And yet, these seemingly separate incidents were pieces of a much darker puzzle, one that would remain unsolved for decades. It all began in the
early 1980s.
when crime-solving relied on intuition and paper files. Phones were landlines, crime cruisers patrolled streets without GPS, surveillance cameras were science fiction. Fingerprints, basic blood typing, and handwritten reports were all detectives had. DNA profiling, matching genetic material to suspects, and genetic genealogy, tracing family trees through DNA, did not exist. The system was unprepared for a mind as calculating as
Daniel Harper.
The first disappearance seemed isolated. By the second,
Detective Mark
noticed patterns, but the leads were thin, scattered, and often contradictory. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts. Suspects came and went. Every lead dissolved before it could be properly investigated.
Daniel Harper.
Understood the limitations of the era perfectly. He stayed one step ahead, blending seamlessly into ordinary life, laughing at the very notion that he could be caught. The neighborhood itself seemed unchanged, almost mocking the fear that lay beneath its surface. Children still played on lawns, neighbors still waved at one another, dogs still barked, yet beneath this normalcy, a shadow stretched over the community. Every disappearance left an invisible mark on the town. Every unsolved mystery, every failed investigation, every misstep added a layer of quiet dread. Life continued on the surface, but beneath, anxiety and suspicion lingered, like a low fog that refused to lift.
Daniel Harper.
His mind was methodical. He observed routines, which families left lights on, which streets were patrolled, which neighborhoods had the least resistance. He calculated risk meticulously. He studied the limitations of law enforcement. Ordinary life gave him cover. Normality became camouflage. Every family, every neighbor, every passerby became a piece in his hidden game, and for 40 years he would play it perfectly. The victims' families endured decades of quiet suffering. Parents clung to hope with trembling hands. Siblings stayed awake listening for calls that never came. Friends whispered silent prayers into empty rooms. The weight of uncertainty pressed on them every day.
Small towns and Riverton neighborhoods,
once bastions of safety, became haunted landscapes. The question lingered: could the friendly neighbor, The co-worker, the smiling face at the corner store, be responsible? Fear settled into daily life, unnoticed yet unshakable, shaping routines, conversations, and quiet thoughts. Even as the case went cold, evidence never disappeared. Files sat on dusty shelves, photographs faded, notes collected dust, but the truth was waiting, patient and relentless.
Retired Detective Mark carried memories of every clue that slipped through their fingers.
Haunted by the questions that had no answers. Somewhere, decades later, a hair, a fiber, a trace of blood would finally speak, and when it did, it would rewrite everything.
The victims' stories brought horror painfully close to home. Emily, a waitress full of life, vanished without warning. Ryan, a college student, determined and ambitious, never returned from the quiet streets of a late-night campus. Ava Bennett, a librarian, precise and meticulous, disappeared on her nightly walk.
These were not distant tragedies. These were people with friends, families, and futures. And the killer was not a stranger from the shadows. Daniel was part of the everyday world. That duality, ordinary life concealing unimaginable evil, is what unsettled Americans most. Detectives struggled against the limitations of the system. Clues were fragmented, leads dried up, witnesses gave conflicting statements. Each misstep intensified tension, frustration, and despair. Fingerprints and circumstantial evidence could only go so far. Every oversight, every delayed response, every misfiled note allowed the Daniel to remain free. Yet patterns began to emerge, roots, victim types, timing. But connecting these pieces to a living suspect remained impossible. Communities felt the weight of decades of uncertainty. Parents worried silently as children played. Teenagers imagined dangers lurking at every corner. Seniors remembered the day
Emily.
disappearance shook the neighborhood. Across generations, anxiety and suspicion grew. Ordinary routines masked unspeakable danger, and the very streets people walked each day became the stage of hidden horror. Even within the law enforcement community, frustration grew.
Detective Mark.
Did everything they could with the tools at hand. They knocked on doors, interviewed neighbors, retraced steps, yet the predator always remained 3 steps ahead. He understood the limitations of the system better than anyone. Communication delays between precincts, missing files, unprocessed evidence, all worked in his favor. Every failure, every gap, every overlooked clue extended his freedom. Families and communities lived in quiet terror, yet hope persisted, however fragile. Each cold lead, each overlooked piece of evidence was a silent promise. One day, the truth would come to light, and when it did, the shadow that had loomed over neighborhoods for decades would finally be pierced by justice.
By the mid-1980s, the case was officially cold. Files sat untouched, evidence boxed and forgotten, detectives retired, and years, Daniel's ordinary life continued without interruption. Neighbors waved, co-workers joked over coffee, children played in the streets. The streets were peaceful, almost painfully so, masking the darkness that had walked among them for decades. Yet, even in cold files and forgotten notes, the truth waited. Years, Daniel's meticulous planning had allowed him to evade capture for 40 years, but science was advancing, and patience, combined with technology, was about to catch up with him. Decades later, forensic science evolved in ways detectives of the 1970s could never have imagined. DNA profiling and genetic genealogy transformed once overlooked evidence into a path toward justice.
Hair strands, clothing fibers, tiny traces of blood. Evidence that had sat dormant for decades now spoke volumes. Laboratories processed these fragments against nationwide databases. And then, finally, it happened. A match. A name appeared. A face was connected to every disappearance. The breakthrough sent shockwaves through detectives and families alike. Decades of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and silent prayers were suddenly met with answers. Daniel's carefully maintained facade of normalcy began to crumble under the weight of science and persistence. Detectives moved with precision. Every step was calculated. Surveillance captured him in the ordinary rhythms of life, dropping children off at school, grabbing coffee at a local diner, walking his dog along familiar streets. He was a man who could have been anyone, blending seamlessly into a community that had once feared shadows, but now had the tools to illuminate them. The evidence was undeniable. DNA doesn't lie. Every trace, every fiber, every connection led to the same conclusion. Daniel could not hide any longer. The balance of fear and hope shifted. Families felt a fragile but growing sense of relief. The shadow that had loomed for decades was beginning to dissipate. Psychologists explained the killer's mindset: obsession, control, the thrill of evading law enforcement. The duality between his ordinary life and hidden monstrosity was precisely what allowed him to escape detection for so long. By stepping inside the minds of detectives and psychologists, audiences could grasp the meticulous planning and cold calculation behind each crime, making the horror tangible and profoundly unsettling. Communities felt a mixture of disbelief and relief. Families silently thanked the system they had once doubted. Teenagers realized that danger could hide anywhere, even in plain sight. Seniors remembered the day the first disappearance shook their neighborhood. Across generations, the tension that had once gripped the community began to ease, replaced with cautious hope. The breakthrough wasn't just a technical achievement, it was the culmination of decades of persistence. Modern forensic science had given voice to evidence that had been silent for too long, proving that even the most careful predator could eventually be brought to justice.
The arrest was swift, dramatic, and surreal. The suspect froze, the reality of his long-evaded freedom collapsing in an instant.
30 years of deception, evasion, and hidden horror came to an abrupt, unyielding end.
The precision and patience of detectives, combined with the unstoppable clarity of DNA evidence, left no room for doubt. Interrogation followed, hesitation, denial, feigned ignorance, but the detectives were ready. Every detail, every lead, every connection had been verified. Evidence collected decades ago and preserved meticulously spoke louder than the predator ever could. DNA doesn't lie. Genetic genealogy confirmed the link. The predator's ordinary facade crumbled completely under the weight of truth. Families finally experienced the emotional release that had eluded them for decades. Tears flowed freely, hugs were exchanged, silent prayers, whispered for years in the quiet of bedrooms and churches, were finally answered. Relief washed over communities. Disbelief melted into catharsis. From teenagers to seniors, everyone felt the weight of justice delivered and the triumph of persistence, patience, and science. Communities processed the shock collectively.
Parents recalled long-forgotten fears. Teens imagined dangers that had lurked unseen. Seniors remembered the first disappearance that had shaken them. Across generations, the story resonated. Ordinary life had been penetrated by extraordinary evil, yet justice prevailed. Safety, trust, and normalcy were restored, if only partially, in the hearts of those affected. The power of modern forensic science was undeniable. Dusty files, overlooked clues, decades-old evidence, all became keys to unlocking the mysteries that had caused pain for generations. DNA profiling and genetic genealogy transformed frustration into triumph. The predator could not remain hidden, no matter how carefully he had crafted his life. Persistence, technology, and the relentless pursuit of justice ensured he would face consequences. Experts weighed in. Psychologists analyzed his behavior. Obsession, control, and the thrill of evading capture had shaped decades of darkness. Audiences stepping into these insights understood the meticulous planning and cold calculation behind each crime. The ordinary streets, diners, and schoolyards had been the stage for unspeakable acts. That stark contrast, normalcy concealing horror, left viewers breathless, reflective, and profoundly moved. The detective's patience and dedication paid off. Every misfiled report, every overlooked lead, every decade of frustration had been a setup for this moment. The breakthrough wasn't just science, it was justice. Decades of fear, whispers, and unanswered questions had finally been met with resolution. Evil hides, but truth always finds a way. 4 decades of terror, uncertainty, and hidden crimes. The predator had blended into everyday life, a neighbor chatting at the mailbox, a co-worker grabbing coffee at the diner, a man who could be anyone, but illusions shattered in a single moment of reckoning. Cameras recorded the arrest, yet nothing could capture the tension in the community. Children froze mid-bike ride. Families held their breath. Those who had long feared the darkness finally felt hope. As the story concludes, one truth stands clear. Every clue, every file, every memory eventually speaks. Darkness cannot survive. Justice, relentless and patient, will always prevail.